Hey everybody, it's me, Dr. Sean Broyles. It is March the 23rd, 2022 at about 9:43 p.m. I just got back from Tulsa. On Monday and Wednesdays I commute between Oklahoma City and Tulsa because I teach at two colleges. Because I need more money. It's the only way I can pay rent. And because of that, on Monday and Wednesday, I don't really have ready access to my email, but I try to get back to you as soon as possible. I've responded to most of your emails, and there were about 45 of them. If it seems like I copy pasted a quick response of I'll fix it, I'm getting to it, it's because that's exactly what I did. So, all the complaints, I believe I addressed in the announcement, and that was about the technical issues of needing a group administrator permission or whatever to post. I went to Moodle forums, I went to technical support, and I got that fixed. And I'm in the process of seeing if that's actually what fixes it now. If not, tomorrow, as soon as the university opens, I'm going and I'm talking to technical support anyway. I've been doing this for about 6 years, and this is the first time that this has ever happened to me on Moodle. But like it's Moodle, they updated it. There's always some technical difficulty. The second problem, which is explicitly my fault, is that there is a disjoint between the textbook that this class was designed around and the textbook that is in there now. And I went through and I changed a whole bunch of the title headings, but I wasn't able to change everything. And that just means I'm going to have to redo that stuff, which is fine. I do love teaching this class, and I'm always learning new things, and I pride myself on not recycling too much old material. But I guess this is just going to make me uh, do that. So I went through and I deleted some assignments. I apologize if you did the quiz. That quiz was explicitly built on having access to the Making of the West textbook. At the last minute, the school told me that I had to ditch the Making of the West textbook. And that was the book that was on my syllabus, so I got rid of it on my syllabus. That I have to use the open educational resources, which are the free textbooks, which are not they're not good textbooks, but I have read them, I am familiar with them, and I can design a class now around those textbooks. So all the courses, all the parts of the course coming out from here on out will be centered around the Western Civilization in 3 volumes textbook that's available for free next to your syllabus. That's all I can think of right now. So to get into actual history, once again, I apologize about the technical difficulties. I'm under a lot of pressure here from two schools, but I think it's all smoothed out. We're all going to be fine. You will never be penalized in one of my classes for something that is not your fault. Uh, there's no reason why everybody in here can't make an A that has almost happened before, because I'm very understanding. And if you message me and you work with me on a case by case basis, I will let you make stuff up unless you just absolutely did a terrible job or you're obviously messing with me or taking advantage of me or something. And that's because this is a community college and I want you to learn history. My primary goal is to get you to learn history. Western civilization. There are a lot of things I want you to learn, and I don't think you necessarily learned that by me being the cruelest professor possible. I had plenty of professors in college, from history to physics, that prided themselves on the highest test grade in their class was like 54. That's not the case in here. If you ever have any questions about what's going on, do what you all did with these technical issues and email me. Like, it's my job. I'm supposed to respond to those things. But if I don't respond immediately, it's probably because I'm driving between Oklahoma City and Tulsa. That's most likely why. So now to get to the part that I actually enjoy doing. There's a massive glare in my glasses on this thing. I'm Dr. Sean Broyles. I got my doctorate, which you can sort of see. Oh no, that's my master's from OSU. Just above me here is my PhD from the University of Cyprus. Actually, see, I can tilt the camera up here. Yeah. There we go. There's 2 degrees from OSU and 1 from Panepistimiou Kyprou, which is the University of Cyprus. So I just got back to America from Cyprus. It's a small Greek island just off the coast of Turkey. If you'll notice behind me, I have the Elleniki Simea, the Greek flag. I love Greece, obviously, very much, as well as I love Cyprus. They're two distinct places. That's a different discussion for a different time. I went and I got my degree in Ottoman history there, so I specialize in Islamic history, although I have been teaching Western civilization for a very long time. I specialize in the early modern period, and that's this period. That's what we're talking about, is the early modern period. So roughly like 1500-ish, really from the Protestant Reformation and all its consequences into the modern, just up to like through the 19th century is what's considered the early modern. Though I have like right next to me, I have an academic journal of like people with PhDs arguing about what early modern means. I don't know if that's a fruitful discussion. It's about the time frame that we're doing. So you will notice there's a small discussion about Louis XIV, the first absolutist ruler of France. So this week, as you do your reading within the OER textbook, which is the proper textbook, I promise it's the proper textbook, you're going to read about absolutism. There's this image, and it's an almost caricature, it's a cartoon that we have about what went on with royalty and nobility during the medieval period. And that's that kings had absolute power. They did not. Kings almost explicitly had to rely on the powers of nobles and local notables. If they wanted to go to war, and therefore they wanted to raise taxes to fund their war, they couldn't just, mandamos. They couldn't command it. They had to go around asking, sometimes in person, for money and for support from the nobility, from other people within the upper crust of society. And so the king did not have absolute power, and the king could not do whatever he wanted. What's so interesting about kingship in the early modern period in places like France is that it becomes that way. So absolutist monarchy is absolute in terms of power. So the reason why Louis XIV really exemplifies this is because his theory of rulership was that he felt that the collection of taxes and the running of the country and the administration of France was being prevented. It was by the nobles. The nobility was preventing France from being run efficiently, and he wanted to make the nobles answer to him. So he actually moves the capital of France from from Paris up to Versailles, which is just a few kilometers north of Paris, where he has his own royal residency. He passes a whole bunch of like sumptuary laws, and he passes a law that says if you're a noble, you have to have a residence and you have to stay there something like a third of the time of the year. And a lot of this stuff he does because he does have a monopoly on force. So he is kind of just doing the mandamos, the we commanded, that other kings would very much have liked to do. And slowly over time, as he builds a system where then in order to get an audience with the king, you have to go to your residence, you have to leave Paris, you have to go up to Versailles to go see him in person. And to get favor with the king, he actually has to physically see you. So you're coming to the king on the king's terms rather than your own. This is an absolute power move. And so Louis XIV is going to set France on this course where the king gets ever more centralized power. Leading up to the French Revolution, one of the big complaints is going to be the arbitrariness of the king, issuing things like lettres de cachet, which are these basically like letters of arrest that are issued to arrest a citizen for speaking ill of the king. So, for instance, the famous philosopher Francis Marie Arouet, also known as Voltaire, famously wrote the book Candide. He wrote some salacious sexual things about the king having sex with a family member, and for that, a lettre de cachet was issued against him, and I believe he was imprisoned, and then he was exiled, then brought back and imprisoned again. I'd have to go back and look up Voltaire's life. But the point is, the king is going around performing these incredibly arbitrary acts, and this is sort of the heart of absolutism. Linked to absolutism, another term I want you to pay attention to, is mercantilism. So mercantilism is basically a policy. It's an opinion of economy where the state seeks to strengthen its own authority via its central treasury. It gets a lot of private companies to engage in joint stock operations, and it really, really ties and centralizes everything to the crown. It's into economic protectionism, so it's into protective tariffs. So you have a bunch of French clockmakers, and unfortunately the English make better clocks for cheaper, and they're selling English clocks to your French peasants. And the problem is you want French clockmakers to thrive. So what you do is you pass a protective tariff, which is a tax on foreign clocks, tax on English clocks, which makes them more expensive to buy by your own peasantry. And then your people are basically forced to buy French clocks. Or French clocks become economically competitive with English clocks. So what this means is that mercantilism is often called the economic theory behind absolutism. It's also sort of the driving economic theory behind imperialism, which is going to become very important as we sort of get into what the British Empire is doing. Because one of these main ideas of mercantilism is we go out and we establish colonies, and those colonies give us raw materials, and we make sure they can only sell those raw materials to us. They're not allowed to make finished goods. So a great example is like in colonial America in the 1770s, there was something called a hat law. And it was that the Americans could go capturing animals and skinning like beavers for fur to make hats. But they weren't actually allowed to make hats in colonial America. They had to ship the fur back to England, where English hat makers, who were taxed by the English crown, make the hats. And then they ship the hats back and they sell them back to the Americans at markup, because a finished good is always more expensive than the raw goods out of which it was produced. And so this is sort of the essence behind empire that we're going to go into a lot greater detail about. Last idea that I want you to be solid on, I have a whole discussion question about it, and it is, what is confessionalization? Confessionalization is this idea thought up by a German historian. His name escapes me, but it's about the Reformation. So throughout medieval Europe, from like the 6th century and from Gregory the Great all the way up until the 16th century and the Reformation, so like Luther nails his 95 Theses protesting the Catholic Church to a church door in Wittenberg in 1519, I believe. Look it up, Google it. It's 1515 or 1519, I promise. There's a lot of stuff going on up here as far as history goes. And he's going to officially protest the Catholic Church. And what happens is, between Gregory the Great in the 6th century and Martin Luther, there's a somewhat uninterrupted Catholic order. Before Martin Luther, there were plenty of protests against Catholic order. There's a whole order of Christian heresies that happen, especially in Central Europe. The main ones that come to mind are like the Hussites under Jan Hus and Jan Zelensky, who actually fight the Catholic Church after they establish their own sort of like radical proto-Protestantism. There's the Wycliffards under John Wycliffe. The Bible gets translated from Latin into the Vulgate English language, which was very scandalous and sort of very threatening to church power. But other than these heresies, Catholic order within the European continent holds. If you live in Europe, Central Europe and Western Europe, you're probably Catholic. Now, as far as Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean, where I like to spend most of my time, that's definitely not the case. And sometimes you had Orthodox populations that were living under Catholic rule, or sometimes they were living under Muslim rule, and it wasn't particularly great for them under either master. But if you live in Western and Central Europe, you're almost certainly a Catholic. And what happens is the Protestant Reformation that we're going to go into breaks apart the piece of that order. Problems though it may have had, it represented stability. You had a king in Germany, or you had the Holy Roman Emperor, you had the King of Spain, you had the King of England, the King of France, and all these people who were from vastly different places could all say that they had the same faith, and they answered in a way. It's not fair to say in Catholicism they answer to the Pope, because that's not how Catholicism works, and that's not how the medieval order works. But they all sort of revere the Pope's opinion. And this creates a sort of political stability. Like, certainly there's warfare that happens in medieval Europe, but it's simply not as large scale as people in the modern day seem to think it is. The medieval Catholic order was actually a very, very peaceful order. What happens whenever it's interrupted by the Protestant Reformation, you get small parts of England and France and Italy, and they're starting to convert to this sort of new faith. And you get an effect called confessionalization. So, imagine this. Confessionalization is simply this. You have a homogenous population, homogenous meaning a population that's made of mostly the same people of the same ethnicity and the same religion. And then suddenly you introduce a heterogeneous element, right? You drop in somebody who's a different ethnicity, a different religion, and this causes tension. This causes intercommunal tension. And what happens is each member of that community, whether it's like the host native community or if it's like the foreign insurgent community that's put in, they are both going to turn further into their own identities, and they're going to become much more interested in policing their own community's ways of processing their identity. So whereas like in medieval Catholic Europe, I mean, Catholicism was taken seriously, but there's all sorts of local traditions going on around Catholic Europe all the time. We have records from the Inquisition, and the Inquisition was simply just not the bloodthirsty monster that movies and popular culture makes it out to be. They were actually incredibly litigious, and they rarely executed anybody. So what happens is that with the introduction of Protestantism, and therefore the idea of Catholicness being threatened, and likewise Protestants are this embattled minority in a sea of Catholicism, both of these groups are going to become, more interested in articulating their identity so as to separate themselves from the other. And what they're going to use to do this is something called social discipline. So the Catholic Counter-Reformation is going to become very concerned in policing priests and making sure that they're engaging in the proper rites, they're not teaching any heresy. Often the state is going to get involved, an absolutist monarch is going to get involved, and is going to try to enforce some of this social discipline. The Protestants, they developed their own forms of social discipline. Calvin's Geneva, John Calvin, takes over and he becomes dictator of a city in Switzerland called Geneva for a short time. It's very short-lived, it's very unpopular, and it's a terrible place to be, and Calvin passes all these laws like there's no drinking, no dancing, no having fun, no holding hands out in public, and that sort of thing. Especially no holding hands out in public, or you'll be like burned at the stake or hanged. It was an absolutely horrifying place to be. And this is called social discipline. This is social discipline which results from confessionalization. Confessionalization is this process by which different communities who are forced to interact with each other, so Protestants and Catholics, they dig in hard to their identities, and they turn to the state to provide social discipline to make sure their boundaries of identity are maintained. And this is confessionalization. And this is what I want you to think about as you're reading your chapter. So, once again, I apologize about all the technical difficulties. Let this be the real welcome video. I apologize so much. In my defense, I am very busy. But, also a point against me, I'm also incredibly lazy. And there are some things I should have changed which I did not change. I apologize to all of you about that. And I will make an announcement tomorrow about what assignments will be due this week. But everybody's going to get through this fine. So if you have any questions, email me.